All right,
Roll on, rock and roll.
here we go. Miscellaneous. Ooh, external amplifiers.
Yeah, I don't see the green.
Oh, Jesse?
I see it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what that green box was.
It's the FCC.
Yeah. Some prohibited communications, spread spectrum, auxiliary stations, Canadians operating in the US, special temporary authority, approval to go do experimental stuff, and the control operator of an auxiliary station. So spread spectrum is permitted above 220, 222, which must be what? 35 centimeter?
No,
No?
it's 1.2.
1.2
5
meters. Okay.
It's kind of odd because they got, you got a, I think there's a digital section that's 219 to 220, and then 220 to 22, nothing is allowed. And then 222 to 224 is back open again for a phone.
Well, that lower one, isn't that for control? Basically, they use it for control for repeaters and things.
I can't remember what it is. It's in yellow or orange, so it's kind of different from anything else, but it's the only spot that I remember seeing in that color.
Okay.
I think some kind of control thing.
And they put some conditions that you can't have spread spectrum emissions that cause interference. I'm not sure that that's really different than the other emissions.
Can you move that little gray rectangular by head? Thank you.
That one?
Yeah.
All right. And again, I think what they're trying to say in this last one is it can't be encoded. You can't obscure the meaning of the transmission of the communications.
No big Latin.
Huh?
No big Latin.
Well, now, if that's a published standard, I guess you could do pig Latin. Because you can do Morse code, and that's basically encoded, but it's public.
Right.
Recognizable.
Right.
But Vogon poetry is not allowed. Or encrypted.
On what frequencies are spread spectrum transmissions permitted?
The
What'd you say?
Bravo.
Bravo. Which of the following conditions apply when transmitting spread spectrum emissions?
Must be D.
Must be D, because I think at least two of them I got.
If there's, well, call it has to be all three.
Yeah.
Can't just be two, but in this case, it's all three.
Two of the three. It's a good possibility.
Yeah.
Fourth and good cost.
I had a question about the spread spectrum. You
Okay.
know, in other words, I won't be able to receive it, right? Because I mean, because you got to sync up, you spread spectrum, you got to sync up to that message some kind of way to receive it, right? So I mean, it's not, in other words, you don't have, you know, in other words, somebody's doing spread spectrum, nobody else is going to be able to read it or
Correct.
You need
this.
Well, that's why it was developed by the military. So you couldn't, if you didn't have the sequence code, basically, you could not receive it. So you have to have a transmitter and receiver that both have the same
pre-programmed plan.
I can't remember exactly what you call it, but there's
You went over it.
yeah. It's different on whether it's direct sequence or frequency hopping. And
Right.
most of the stuff, like cell phones, I believe, is frequency hopping. I think the military was the one that probably did the direct sequence. And that one, they use one of something like 22 different patterns that are at, what was it, 11 times the bit rate or something like that to modulate it. So it's really spread spectrum. Instead of hopping around, you transmit with spurs all over the place, and you have to know which ones to look for. But you're right. You've got to have spread spectrum receiving equipment that can decode it, and you also have to have the code to decode it, which is why it was developed in the first place back many, many years ago. Let's see. And you've got to satisfy the spurs emission when you're operating at 1500 watts or less. For external power amplifiers, you have to be a licensed amateur to build or modify an amplifier that operates below 144 megahertz. Unless it's an amplifier that sold to an amateur or a dealer and is purchased and used by a dealer and sold to an amateur. And I think the bottom line there is it's not a commercial operation. If you go buy one from ham radio outlet, a Yaesu or an ICOM or something, it has to meet all those rules. Doesn't necessarily if it's one of these used hand-me-downs, modified. So under what circumstances may a dealer sell an external RF power amplifier capable of operation below 144 megahertz if it has not been granted FCC certification?
So if I have a linear a Heathkit linear that's been modified for 10 years, is that?
Did you modify? Well,
No.
I mean, but you're licensed,
Right.
and it was modified by an amateur, or
Most likely.
yeah.
So
So
it's good.
you should be good if you built it yourself, because it's not certified by the FCC, but you're allowed to do that. Although I'm not sure how many licensed amateurs are capable of doing that, but you're allowed to. So what's the answer? Which of the following best describes one of the standards that must be met by an external RF power amplifier if it is to qualify for a grant of FCC certification? And Canada. This brings up the line A, which is some line kind of roughly parallel to the US-Canadian northern border. There's a bunch of specifics, I think, on the next slide. But if you're north of that line, you can't transmit in the 420 to 430 megahertz range at all. And I think there's some other restrictions as far as power. And it turns out, and I didn't realize, there's a line B, which is kind of the reciprocal. It's on the Canadian side, and they can't transmit south of line B into the US.
So how far are these lines off the border?
Glad you asked. It begins at Aberdeen, Washington. And on the 48th parallel over to 120 degrees latitude, and then 48th parallel to the 95th, and it finally gets down to the 45th parallel, and then eventually down to the 41st. Winds up over here in Bangor, Maine. So it's not, it doesn't follow the 48 period. It's kind of slanted down. How far that is distance wise, I don't know. You'd have to check it on a map.
But that means if you're in Bangor, Maine. And the line that's south of it. You can't do.
You can't do 424.3.
Checking mentally.
Yeah. And I assume, I didn't say anything about where line B is, but it's probably similar.
Yeah.
Maybe it's parallel to line A. I don't know. Amateur stations may not transmit in which of the following frequency segments located north of line A in the US? That didn't include Alaska, so I guess they're exempt, right? Although they have some restriction about Russia.
We're going, in that direction. So Canada might have a line going up to,
Line C.
you know, all along the.
There's nothing in Canada along the Alaskan border, except elk and moose.
Three bears.
Which of the following geographic descriptions approximately describes line A? Alpha.
There you go. Hey, remember that one.
Yeah. Okay, Canadian licensees have privileges in the US up to amateur extra class, but not to exceed. So I don't know really what's different about Canadian ones, but it sort of implies like there may be some privileges beyond extra for a Canada operator that they can't do in the US.
Only if they say A.
They say
But
A. Hey or A?
Yeah.
Maybe
Hey.
they're authorized 70 miles. There's.
They also have, we have some real strict requirements in an area about, it's some long areas, about 15 to 20 miles south of the border, that we are not allowed airborne to use US military frequency, VHF frequencies.
Why?
And it's interesting because we don't have that restriction along the Mexican border, but we cannot put airborne repeaters along their borders.
I guess it says some agreement with Canada, huh?
Or disagreement with.
Or disagreement. Reciprocal operating authorities. It's another Canadian one. So if you've got a Canadian license, and this is just the Part 97 rule that talks about the previous slide of they have privileges not to exceed the FCC amateur extra class. And since it's a reciprocal, I would assume there's a similar thing of us operating in Canada.
See.
Charlie, sounds good. Compensated communications. You can't accept compensation or money for operating a station, except for the exceptions. Huh? I know one of the exceptions, because it comes up on the tech and or general, is about classroom. You can get compensated for doing amateur radio in the classroom. That's kind of one of the exceptions. And you are allowed to send a message to a business as long as you or the employer don't have any pecuniary interest in the message. So I guess that means as long as you're not doing business with the business, you can send a message.
Supposing I called you and said, do you have a carburetor for my Ford? I haven't actually done business sort of, but I have, sort of,
Yeah, that's probably gray,
yeah. Yeah, I'm
because
not going
you're
to-
implying
Yeah.
a transaction.
Yeah, but I suppose it'd be legal to say to you, where's the best Ford dealership? You're not the Ford guy.
But I think person to person,
Yeah.
okay, it's not person to business.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's it.
It's one of those that it's only in the exam. I don't expect it.
It's not like you're ordering a pizza.
The rules 97 says it this way, that you cannot transmit communications for hire or material compensation, direct, indirect, paid, promised, except as otherwise, which means there's exceptions. And there's exceptions to most everything in these rules. And you can't do it when the licensee or control operator has a monetary interest in the communications. And they listed some follow exceptions, which we don't need. So which of the following types of amateur station communications are prohibited? Yeah, because you can talk in other than English.
In Latin works.
Yeah. You can talk about religion, you can talk about politics. You can't do money, and you can't do hidden stuff, business stuff. Which of the following types of amateur station communications are prohibited? Transmitted for hire or material compensation. When may an amateur station send a message to a business? Delta. Oh, this is the tricky one. Because 97-201A says that any amateur station licensed to a holder of a technician, general advance, or amateur extra may be an auxiliary station. Okay. So an auxiliary station can be a station licensed to technician, general, advanced, or extra. But not a novice. So who may be the control operator of an auxiliary station? Means it's not A. Okay, special temporary authority. You can apply for permissions or special privileges to do experimental work in amateur radio. So you can get kind of a special dispensation from the FCC to operate on a specific frequency or some new mode, like you're trying to develop some new digital technique or something like that. And that's all their wording about it. Basically to allow to conduct tests necessary to determine necessary data for the preparation of an application for a regular authorization. So in other words, you intend to develop some new digital mode like FT9 or something. Under what circumstances might the FCC issue a special temporary authority to an amateur station?
Alpha.
Alpha. Okay,
Thank you, Bob.
that was easy, right?